He asked me questions, I answered, I clarified, and I think that he was satisfied with my answers.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. I'm Jonathan Capehart in for Joy Reid. The Russiagate investigation appears to be closing in on Team Trump. The New York Times reported last night that Donald Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort had a previously undisclosed Trump Tower meeting last June with a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin. As the Times points out, this is the first confirmed private meeting between a Russian national and members of Mr. Trump's inner circle during the campaign. The Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, is known for fighting the U.S. Magnitsky Act, which allows the U.S. to seize the assets of and deny visas to suspected human rights abusers from Russia. In retaliation for the 2012 law, Russian President Vladimir Putin banned American adoptions of Russian children. Don Jr. and Kushner have both confirmed the meeting took place. Don Jr. says they primarily discussed the adoption program, but meanwhile, the president's outside legal team is suggesting the meeting was a setup by Democrats. Quote, the participants in the meeting misrepresented who they were and who they worked for. Specifically, we have learned that the person who sought the meeting is associated with Fusion GPS, a firm which, according to public reports, was retained by Democratic operatives to develop opposition research on the president and which commissioned the phony Steele dossier. These developments raise serious issues as to exactly who authorized and participated in any effort by Russian nationals to influence our election in any manner. Joining me now, MSNBC political analyst David Korn, the Counter-Extremism Project's Tara Mahler, former White House Senior Director Nayyera Hack, Executive Director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project, Malcolm Nance, and former FBI double agent Naveed Jamali. Welcome all to the show. Wow, there is so much to talk about this morning. But before we start, the president has been tweeting all this morning, and he sent out a tweet, and for the folks in the control room, it's element 2, and I want to put that up. The president tweeted, I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it. I've already given my opinion. I just want to go around the table, given this previously undisclosed meeting between folks close to the president and a Russian national, and then the president's tweets this morning. What do you make of where we are in this whole Russia mess? And since you're just below me there, Malcolm, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thanks. You know, it's literally like he spent the entire flight back from the G20 summit thinking about what he could, you know, what he wanted to deny or what he wanted to, how he wanted to shape the message. And this morning's tweet storm is just classic. I mean, you know, Vladimir Putin vehemently denied it. That's okay for me. That in itself is troublesome. And even worse is the tweet that you're probably going to talk about next, which is setting up the joint cybersecurity unit with Russia to stop meddling in elections.
Yeah,
that's absolutely insane.
There it is.
Who is that just saying, there it is?
That was me.
Which is that Naveed? David, can you jump in and talk about this? I mean, I'm speechless. Again, 2 days in a row, I'm speechless. Yeah. There's the tweet. Putin and I discussed forming an impenetrable cybersecurity unit so that election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded. Say what?
Jonathan, I've known you a long time. You're never truly speechless. But I mean, the level of everyone at the G20 is talking about John Podesta and not turning over DNC servers to the CIA. Everything in that tweet was wrong. His inability to even say anything strong or assertive to Donald Trump about to Putin attacking the United States. You have Lindsey Graham and other, just a very few other Republicans coming out against this, now saying we're going to create a cyber working group with them. That's like saying we're going to create a non-proliferation committee with North Korea. I mean, there's nothing, his number one job. I mean, it's easy to laugh about this and make fun of this, and I do that too all the time, but his number one job is to defend the United States from foreign enemies.
Right.
He is not doing that. He's cozying up. He's saying that he's honored. He is honored to meet the man who the intelligence community says attacked American democracy.
Yeah, an intelligence community that the president has been attacking since before he was president. Tara, on the story that's in the New York Times and about this meeting, this meeting between Don Jr. and Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and this Russian national Natalia Veselnitskaya. What do you make of that? And this idea that they primarily talked about adoption, does that hold water for you?
It seems a little bit strange, and it seems stranger on the heels of a number of undisclosed meetings. This is the first we're hearing about this meeting. It involved Jared Kushner, and it involved Donald Trump Jr. I think one of the problems here is this comes on the heels of numerous meetings that were undisclosed with the Russians, not just with Jared Kushner and members of the Trump family, but also individuals on his campaign. So I think in and of itself, not particularly overly problematic. In a sort of series of events around this issue, I think it is troublesome for the Trump administration that they just keep having more and more information come out. Why was this meeting taking place? It was fairly, a high level of Jared Kushner and the president's son were involved. And why did we not hear about this until now? And it also, remains to be seen. All of these tweets this morning about foreign policy issues, I don't really think this is anyone's best interest to be undermining the intelligence community on Twitter. I think that's also a key point about this. It seems that even when he's trying to perhaps be diplomatic towards other countries, he's doing it at the expense of the United States intelligence community, which is highly problematic. And I think President Trump would be best off, listening to some of the advice of the intelligence community, particularly when dealing with adversaries, which the intelligence community tracked long before he was dealing with them.
Right. Nayyera, I want to get you to comment on the New York Times story, but because Tara just mentioned the intelligence community and what the president, the fight that the president is in with the intelligence community, since we've got Naveed Jamali here. Naveed, as someone who was a former FBI double agent, how do you feel about the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, being seemingly constantly at war with the intelligence service that is supposed to be working for him in the protection of this country?
Jonathan, when I tell my kids don't eat cookies and do your homework, and they come back and eat cookies and don't do their homework, I don't then ask them, did they do their homework and eat cookies? I know that they didn't. Well, the intelligence community has come out and said Russia's behind this. You don't need to ask Vladimir Putin. I don't even understand what the president hoped to gain by it. If Vladimir Putin said, yes, we hacked the election, what the larger part here. Years ago, I worked for the Secret Service electronic task force, and one of the biggest things when it comes to cybersecurity is, of course, hardening the cyber defenses, but the other part is extraditing cyber criminals. Guess who we don't have a treaty for extradition with? That's Russia. At the core of this, if we're going to go after people in Russia who are behind cyber attacks, whether it be stealing credit cards or anything like that, you have to be able to extradite people. I guarantee you Russia is not going to extradite. So we can have this task force all we want. We actually have a pretty decent relationship years ago with the Russians, with this, but they would never give us a body. So that's not going to change. This is just a lot of, just smoke here. And I think it affects the morale of the intelligence community and law enforcement when they say, this is not what we need. Russia, we need you to come out and say Russia is our adversary and not have a 2.5-hour meeting with someone who just undermined the core foundations of our country.
And we're looking at the tweet that the president sent out this morning. Fake news said 17 intelligence agencies, when actually 4 had to apologize. Why did Obama do nothing when he had info before the election? And as we all know, the consensus of the intelligence community is that Russia hacked our previous, interfered with the 2016 election. Nayyera, you're the one person here on the panel who's worked at the State Department, worked at the White House. Give me your reaction to everything that you've heard, starting in on the New York Times story about this previously undisclosed meeting between the president's son, Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law.
Well, and here's the irony. For a family that truly understands and takes advantage of the media and public perception, boggles my mind why they decided to take a meeting with the Russians during the middle of the campaign, when the only thing that would result from it would be questions about national security that they weren't prepared to answer. So just not taking the meeting would have been the easiest thing. But what we're seeing right now is a White House and a president that are furiously spinning to try to put some substance around a meeting that was truly a failure for national security. To spend 2.5 hours with the head of your adversary, the lead adversary himself, Putin, and to walk out thinking that, they didn't really do anything wrong. There's no other person in the United States or any U.S. citizen that would get that kind of treatment from the President of the United States, right? There's nobody right now that President Trump would probably say, oh, you were accused by the crime, you said you didn't do it. I believe you. So the idea that he would do that with an adversary shows two things: that he truly doesn't understand what it means to keep America safe and national security. And the second part, that he actually can't handle one-to-one confrontations and conversations, that a lot of his psychology of bullying and the bluster, he folds when it comes to actually being one-on-one with someone in a meeting. And what ends up happening is afterwards, he has a furious tweet storm to try to cover it up.
Or he sends someone to go fire the person, like he did with FBI Director James Comey, who wasn't even in Washington when he was fired. But I want to get everyone talking about the president's personal legal counsel in the statement that I read in the intro to this, where they're trying to put the blame on Democrats, basically saying that Fusion GPS was a Democratic outfit, and that's the reason why this dossier was done, and that it's fake and all that. And I just the so-called Steele dossier was not started by Democrats. It was started by a wealthy Republican who wanted to stop Donald Trump, and their efforts ended once Donald Trump got the nomination. And so to try to say that this was some grand scheme by the Democrats to set up Donald Trump is ridiculous. Malcolm.
Well,
or David. Who was that? David? Go ahead, David.
I've done a lot of reporting on this. Of course, Malcolm is an expert, too. But you got to say that Fusion GPS did put out a statement saying that it had nothing to do with the meeting. It was indeed working with an American law firm that was working with a Russian person who had hired this Russian attorney. So there is a connection. But what Mark Corallo is doing is trying to create an alternative narrative here in this bizarre world in which the Steele memos, which again also I first reported on before the election, was somehow cooked up as part of a KGB disinformation campaign that used the Democrats to try to discredit Trump. They've been pushing this story out in a lot of different ways. There is actually no truth to it, and you're going to see this deflection over and over again. The big question is, why was the Trump people meeting with the Russians at a time when that was an issue? Trump had made all these Putin positive statements, and they should have known better than to meet with a Kremlin attorney.
And this is part of what you'll start seeing from the White House, and we've been seeing the last couple of weeks from the president himself, is the muddying of the waters. Anytime a direct question is asked about the relationship with Putin, or even whether or not he believes or has accepted the intelligence community assessment, it gets deflected either onto Obama or the Democrats or emails. And that itself is very telling, that the president cannot come out and equivocally back up the national security establishment.
And
Malcolm,
I will add, if I could just add to Nayyera's
real
point.
fast, and then Malcolm, go ahead.
President Trump's been critical of the Obama administration in his tweets this morning. By that logic, isn't it hypocritical that he's not taking a stronger stand right now against cybersecurity hacking? If he didn't think the Obama administration did enough when they learned about it, he should be taking an even firmer stand, not sitting there perhaps nodding in agreement or not confronting Putin, and not sitting there crafting any sort of policy response. A cybersecurity working group is not a deterrent strategy. It's not a punishment strategy. It doesn't prevent actors from doing a certain behavior over and over again. It seems like a pretty soft response. It seems like a working group of nonsense.
Right.
And what's going around on Twitter right now is it's like forming again a group with Assad about chemical weapons use. I mean, it's just completely absurd.
And Malcolm, real quick, did you want to squeeze in there?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I go to the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. There's a coffee mug that has Trump's strategy, and this same strategy that was used for this meeting, which is deny, deflect, make counter accusations. That is an old KGB tactic. And this administration has it down to a science. Now they're blaming it on Obama. They'll be blaming it on, Santa Claus next. And it's going to come out in the wash with Director Mueller's investigation. It's not going to be pretty.
David, Tara, Nayyera, and Malcolm will all be back. Thank you, Naveed Jamali. I wish I could have gotten you in once more in this discussion. Coming up.